Welcome to Level Up with Tipi, where we tackle the issues and challenges affecting 911 telecommunicators. Your host, Tipi Brookins, has decades of leadership experience in public safety communications. Here's Tipi.
Good morning, everyone. We are here this morning, and I am super excited because with our vlog today, our Level Up with Myself with Tippy, I am joined with Director Heather McGaffin from the DC Office of Unified Communications, and I'm going to turn it over to her so that she can introduce herself this morning.
Hi, Tiffy. Good morning. Thanks. Thank you, everybody. My name is Heather McGaffin. I'm the proud director of the Office of Unified Communications here in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. We are home to DC's 911 and 311 center, and we are taking about 1.6 million 911 calls annually and about 1.4 million 311 calls annually. So, when all is told at the end of the day, with all of the lines that we answer, including administration, we're taking and processing about 5 million calls annually, making us one of the largest centers, busiest centers in the nation.
Awesome. Yes, that's amazing. And so just working under your leadership, I can tell you that, this conversation that we're going to have today, I pretty much almost know how you feel, but I think to let the public know and let others know what you're doing at the agency is going to be really, really important. And so when we talk about the safety margin beyond compliance, we often talk about how QA isn't a requirement, but how does a robust review process actually create a safety net for our dispatchers and the field units they support and our call takers? And also, in what ways does skipping QA erode the defensibility of our actions during a critical incident?
Yeah, I think when we talk about call takers, especially, um, no one wakes up in the morning and says, "Today's the day I'm going to go in and just get it wrong." Nobody thinks that. The calling to be a call taker in any 911 center is that it's a calling. I can remember the first time I took a 911 call, how scared and nervous I was. I understood the gravity of what I was about to do. I was about to answer someone in their possible worst moment and be responsible to help them calm down, get the situation under control, and choose the right thing to send to the dispatcher so that they could send the field responders out. Um, Back then, when I started, we didn't think of call takers as the first responders that they are. And anytime there's any sort of public trust placed in a person, there has to be a quality assurance review of what they're doing. Police officers have it, firefighters have it, call takers need to have it. And so, what I see and what I try to live, and what I've always tried to live in any job that I've ever had, mostly all in 911, is to identify what didn't go how we wanted it to go, and then build from that. And folks can just have a bad day. That happens. I could just be off my game because I've got something else going on, or I just don't understand it and I want to learn how to do better. And so, what we've really done here at the Office of Unified Communications and what we're able to do with GovWorks is look at every single call very granularly, and pick it apart in all the ways, not just looking for the errors and the mistakes, but looking for what people are doing really, really well. Because then what I have been able to find in just our short time using GovWorks is that we have people who do CPR instruction really, really well. For whatever reason, they seem to get the calls more frequently than others, and they just handle it. And so, what we're able to do is we're able to share with their colleagues, hey, this person is really great at this. And then now, what we're doing is we're even bringing those folks over to our training academy, and they're sharing their stories. They're listening to their calls while the person is walking them through what was going through their mind, how they were reacting to things. And just last week we had a couple come in. About 5 years ago, a man called 911. His name was Craig, and he called 911 because his fiance Deborah was not breathing. He had never done CPR. He had taken it as a Boy Scout. He had never done it. The call taker did a phenomenal job. And he said he got off the phone and he was like, "Oh my gosh, she was yelling at me and I was just feeling really overwhelmed." But then he said afterwards what he realized was that none of that was true. He was in his own head and that it was the call taker who was able to keep him calm. It was the call taker who was able to give him direction and very be very direct, but not to a point that he was like stammering about what he was supposed to be doing. So I think, QA is multifaceted. I think sometimes people are like, oh, they're trying to get me. That should not be the sense in your center. It should be, we're catching you doing something well, or we're catching you where you could be doing something a little bit better, and we want to make sure that you really understand how to do that. And so that's really where I come from with QA. I was the person who, when I was a call taker and it first started, was like, don't tell me how to do my job. You're not doing this job. But now I have a whole different mindset. And as a leader, it's my job to help change the mindset so that people really understand why we're doing something. And I think that's all people are looking for. Why are we doing it? We're doing it because we know that you want to perform at your best, and this is how we can help you do that.
That's amazing. You mentioned public trust equals QA, right? Because everyone else, they're doing it, and why shouldn't 911 do it? And then also the gotcha. It should not be it. It should be just really using it to recognize other places in performance where they're also doing well. And so when you speak about consistency, right? Consistency is the hallmark of a professional agency. When we skip regular QA, how does the resulting service creep, where different shifts follow different unofficial protocols, impact the trust the public and emergency responders have in our centers?
So that this is one of those questions that I often get, especially when I'm sitting in front of policymakers or legislators, or even the executive. How do we do this? And I always share that the standard is 2%. We should be doing a quality assurance review on 2% of our calls. When I worked in a small center, that was easy. It was like 50 calls a week. That's very manageable. In this center, it's about 550 calls a week. 550 calls a week that we need to QA. We need to QA about 28,000, 29,000 calls annually. So when we talk about that, plus all the things that require instructions, CPR, childbirth. And last year we gave CPR instructions about 500 times and we delivered 63 babies. So those are huge numbers, really hard for people to wrap their heads around. But we are having to do all that. What happens is you have a couple people on your QA team. They're also maybe responsible for something else. They're doing the reviews. They're sending them to supervisors because you're here 24/7. And it's really hard for people to take time off the operations floor to go through the QA process. They want to listen to their calls. They want to be able to see what was said. They want to see exactly where they missed, where they got it right, where they got it wrong. And so also here at OUC, we had 2 people on our QA team full time, and then a couple of part-timers who were also trainers. So every week they're doing 250 calls each, my full-time folks, when training's in session. And then they're missing things. It's not, becoming, not because they want to, but because things happen. And so they're missing things. They're not able to keep up with reviewing things with everybody on a person-to-person basis. And so what really happens is the trust in the system starts to erode. Mm-hmm. Not for any one particular reason, but because if that person's out sick for a week or 2 weeks or is on vacation, then those don't get done. And then you're behind. And then, oh, well, it's not consistent. So what we have found is by automating this process with GovWorks is that it is more consistent. We are able to do it. And so even if we don't have time to look at every single call, we absolutely would not have that kind of time. we are able to see the outliers. We're able to see, hey, this person had a miss. Hey, this person did really well. We're able to do the sit downs. Folks can request that. Um, and it's been much more palatable. From what I see, people are more accepting. Admittedly, at first, people were like, I don't think the system understands this. I don't think the system understands that. But it was great to be able to come back to the team and say, hey, let's work through this. Let's work through what this looks like. Um, but now that it's learning more and it's understanding more of who we are as an agency, I think people are really, really um, feeling confident about what they are and who they are, and the scores have gone up. It's so objective, it's so pinpointed. We're a very data-driven city. I am definitely a data-driven decision maker. And so I'm able to see things in a really clear cut way um, for each individual person, for individual shifts. And it's one of those things where if somebody needs help, we're able to offer that assistance before things go too far.
That's amazing. And so, as you mentioned, consistency with the automation and taking out the bias, and then just basically being able to help you to pinpoint certain specifics that you're looking for is, giving that ability to impact the trust for the public and emergency responders. And so, building confident professionals. The APCO standards emphasize employee relations and professional competence. How does a constructive QA program, build a call taker or dispatcher's confidence rather than just creating a fear of getting caught? And what happens to morale when that feedback loop is removed?
So, one of the things I can think back to when I was a call taker, or even now in my journey through 911, when someone isn't doing things the way that the agency needs or wants them to do something, if they're not meeting the mission, if they're not aligning with the core values, if they're not following policy and procedure, not only is it terrible for the caller and the outcomes could be detrimental, but the people that sit around them also are affected by that. And you get those, right? As leaders, we all, I'm sure, have gotten those emails where it's like, I'm sitting next to Heather and she's never asking anybody the protocol questions. And like, if my parent or grandparent had a call, I don't want her to get Heather as the call taker. And when you think about that, it's those types of things that really put those small cracks in the windshield, right? They're the pebbles that hit the windshield. And then what happens is one morning you wake up and the whole windshield's shattered because there were so many small little dings and cracks in it that something changed and like the temperature changed or something happened and now the whole thing is shattered. And it happens quick and it happens when you least expect it and it's not repairable at that point. So
Mhm.
when we have these little dings in the windshield, we can repair those, right? But when it starts to crack, that's when you're too far gone at that point. And so I just like to think of our agency on a bus. And everybody's got a seat on the bus and the things that we need to keep the bus moving efficiently are things like location determining technology. There are things like protocols, how we answer the call. And there are things like QA so that the machine is running okay as long as the people driving it are paying attention to the warning lights, the little things, not just turning the radio up when you start to hear a little ding, right? But really paying attention. And I feel like that's kind of what QA is doing. It's putting up the warning lights. So you say, hey, we've got to work on this person. Hey, this shift as a whole probably didn't understand that training apparently. So let's go back and revisit it. Um, and what GovWorks has done is like automated it. It's not like we've got to every single time be like, okay, now let's try and figure this out. It's very
Mhm.
much like this is the problem, and it allows us more time to find solutions to help correct the problem than identifying the problem.
That's amazing. And I just really like how you put it, passengers on the bus. And so your job is to keep the wheels to continue to go round and round, on the bus. So I think that was a great analogy there. And as we speak about the hidden cost of good enough, from a leadership perspective, what is the real cost of skipping QA in terms of long-term training and liability? And how has Comms Coach helped your agency to level up?
Yeah, for sure. So when all told, by the time we get somebody in to the OUC, it's a we've already invested about $10,000,
Mhm.
which is wild. And I would encourage every director of every center to really understand what your onboarding cost per person is, whatever that looks like. I mean, for us, we do background checks, we do psychological interviews, we do critical testing. And so there's a lot of things that kind of go into that. Um, drug and alcohol testing, fingerprinting. There's a lot of things that make up that $10,000 piece. And now we're going to train them. And so now we're spending another between $5,000 and $10,000 on training for certifications and things like that. So you have this huge investment that you've made,
Mhm.
right? You have this huge investment that you've made, and now you're just going to put them out there and not follow up on it. No, you've got to know if it works. And so if we are able to QA 100% of our calls, and we are able to understand where folks are needing support, then we can provide that versus separating the person from the agency, which is detrimental for everyone. No one's good day is when somebody has to be separated. And now you've got to go recruit again and be in for another $15,000 maybe just to get them to the point that they can take a 911 call. So I look at it from a fiscal point, but I also, for me, what's more important than that is the well-being of a person.
Mhm.
Imagine you're coming in, you're so excited about this job, you've passed all the background and things like that, which is hard to do. That's not an easy task. You get through all of that, you get through the training, then you go to apply it and you're floundering and you're suffering in silence and you're enduring. And Tibi, you've worked with me long enough to know that I hate when people have to endure something. I don't want people to live in that space. And so what I also know is it can be very, very overwhelming. I think that we have a pretty decent culture here, thanks to a lot of your work and our work together. But you suffer in silence because you don't want to raise your hand and be like, I really don't understand, because you're surrounded by people who are getting it and are doing it and are doing it what appears to be very, very proficiently. And I'm often reminded of myself, my very first week in the 911 center. There was no training program, there were no protocols back then. No training, no protocols. I remember walking in on a Thursday morning at 6 o'clock and being handed like three pieces of paper and was told, we actually start at 5:30. I know the paper says 6, but you need to be here between 5:15 and 5:30. I was like, okay, okay. So Friday I was there at 5:15, but I started on a Thursday. I worked Thursday and Friday day work, and by Sunday night I was answering people on the police radio and running tags. And I look back at that and I'm like, that was wild. How did I ever get through it? And I share this with people in a moment of vulnerability that I hated it. I hated it so much because I was surrounded by a shift of two, maybe three other people sometimes that were so good at what they were doing that I could never thought to myself, I'm never going to be able to do that. Like, I'm never going to be able to keep up. I don't know what these codes are. I don't know what any of this is. And so I had some options. I could have just suffered in silence, or what I ended up doing was making a million flashcards to learn 10 codes and the alphabet and learn their numbers and who was who, because you really had to know all of that kind of stuff. And um, but I understand that if you don't know where to start, you're not going to really have a fighting chance. And so what we want to give folks here are all the tools in their tool belt so that they can do it. And what I don't want them to do is to be burned out in the first year of this job, something that maybe they really, really wanted to do. And so I know I've said a lot in that, but to me, I think it's not just about the fiscal impact. For me, it's also about the emotional impact for people. And also when people leave, your people that are here suffer too, because now they've got to work a bunch of overtime. And I know people love overtime, but people love overtime to a point. They don't want to have to always be here.
Right, right. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I think that fiscal part, I know you said it wasn't all about fiscal, but I think you highlighted about at least almost $35,000 if a trainee doesn't succeed. And then just making sure that you are really, really in tune with your employees' well-being and making sure that they do not suffer in silence. And I can definitely speak to that, being, a part of the agency at one point in time and knowing the work that you put in to ensure that the culture, the culture remained positive and putting in a wellness coordinator in place. And so, just thank you so much for what you do for the industry. And so here at GovWorks with Comms Coach, we are testing and evaluating smarter and building better. Let's take your agency to the next level. I'm Tippy, and we're just getting started.